Hello and welcome to SASC number 7, which is primarily, if you don't mind me just quickly checking my system, primarily focused on research methodologies. But we're going to start off with the traditional SASC way of who are SASC and what do we do? Well, we're here to advise you. We're here to try and make your life a little bit easier, especially in these times of difficulty. So every day of the week, we have a Canvas module open where you can submit articles or papers or whatever you're doing, and we'll read it through. On Tuesdays, we do a live 2 o'clock on MS Teams where anyone from the university student body can log in and ask questions, and there's usually not just me there, there's usually a librarian, and we will help you. We will try and answer questions about writing, about the academic skills side of things, about all those sort of issues you can have, and we'll try and talk you through the stuff. But we also do these videos, and it's hoped they will help. Keywords to always remember for writing: content, reference, presentation, style, ethics, best practice, and corroborate. If you're doing a dissertation, the keywords there are content, reference, and corroborate. If you're involved in anything to do with human-based research, which you probably will be because you can't use labs at the moment on the COVID-19, then ethics and best practice come into it. Quite a lot of ethics and best practice. Anyway, on to the next one. So today's topic, non-laboratory research methodologies advanced. So I'm looking at the non-laboratory ones. If you want to go talk about the lab ones, go talk with your supervisor, but the odds are you can't do much about that with them at the moment because no one's allowed in the labs. So, how to structure a paragraph, seal, statement, evidence, analysis, link. There's a whole other PowerPoint about this. There is a whole other video. Please go into look at that. It's the introduction to writing. There's also even more writing. There's all sorts of videos on this subject I've already put up in this series. So please do go look at them. Please do learn about how to do the academic writing properly. Because what you do not want to do is get into a situation where you're listing a huge amount of evidence but not doing the required amount of analysis, so you don't get as many marks as you deserve. Because you do all the research, you gather all the evidence, but if you don't analyze it properly, you won't get the marks. If you don't link your essay properly so that it's a properly flowing, structured piece of work, you won't get the marks that you deserve. Okay? You deserve those marks because you've done all the work. But you've managed to stop yourself getting those marks because when it's come into the final 10%, the write-up and the putting it together of the whole research and essay process, you have dropped the ball. You are the football team which has got the whole way down the pitch only to pass the ball straight to one of the defenders. Trying to think of another metaphor, but at the moment one's not coming up. Oh well. Strange thing is I played rugby, not football, so I'm not sure where the football one came from. Ah well. 7.1, literature study, aka systemic review, aka peer research analysis. Oh god. Right, so I usually refer to this as a literature study because that's what I was taught and because that's what it basically is. However, there is a movement within certain groups of branches of academia to refine these things and give them a better name and give them all this. In terms of what you're expected to do for your dissertation, for a bachelor's student or a master's student, the differences between what can be defined as a literature study, a systematic review, or a peer research analysis are near enough, as far as I can say, can see differences in terms of phraseology, but not content and actual creation. Okay, people want to use different phrases. They want to sound like they're talking about something different, but it really doesn't produce a different result. Really doesn't produce anything different. So don't worry about it. If I'm talking to you about a literature study and you're going, but my tutor says I have to do a systematic review, don't worry. It's the same thing. Same if it's a peer research analysis. Same if for some reason I'm talking about a systemic review or a systematic review. Sometimes it's a systematic review, sometimes it's a systemic review. There's another name. There's so many names for what is the same thing. Please do not worry about it. Okay. So technically, as you know, doesn't count as primary source information. And for a dissertation, whether it's bachelor's, master's, or PhD thesis, you have to provide some primary research. Now, the thing is, you have to provide a whole lot of evidence and a whole lot of data in your work. And if you're in a scenario where you've got access to the labs, that's very easy. But if you're in a scenario where you've not got access to the labs, to provide the same volume of information is more difficult. So what I've written there is scenarios of how you can use it and how you can get the information required for a dissertation at a bachelor's or master's level. Basically, the difference between a bachelor's and a master's level, especially for the SASC students, is more about the level of detail you go into in terms of what a master's expected is expected even more detail, even more critical analysis. But in terms of grading, it's pretty much the same requirements once you go through them in terms of quality of information we're looking at and in terms of, also broadly speaking, in terms of quantity. Okay, it's the same broadly amounts of information, same high quality of information, but it's the level of depth of analysis you go into, and that's one of the reasons why master students have a bigger word count than bachelor students. So, scenario one: a literature study, case studies, and interviews. So this is actually the most common when you're using this approach. And the interviews are your primary information. So they're your unique information. The case studies are where you bring everything together to explore a specific event or thing or occurrence or drug or whatever in humongous detail. And the literature study takes what you normally provide anyway in your literature review and provides an even greater volume. So instead of it being a literature review, which is a basis and contextual positioning of your work, so basically a literature review is putting my work in context, putting why I'm doing it and what the existing debate is. Literature study takes that a step further, and I'll be explaining a literature study more as we go on. Literature study, survey, interviews, if you want to have a lot of primary information. Remember, the survey is quantitative data, a huge amount of it. The more you have, the better. And interviews are qualitative data. Again, you still need a certain number, but they're about the quality. So one tends to produce bar charts, pie charts, all sorts of graphs and things if you want to do it. The other one produces, pretty much they should have long transcripts which are copied up and put in your appendices, which you can then reference as if they're almost a book. Again, go through the library, check your referencing on that one. Make sure you have good quality referencing. You do not want to do all the work and then have it get into trouble because you've got the referencing the wrong way around or you've used the wrong variation of Harvard, which sounds terrible, but is actually what I've seen happen to people in the past. So please be careful on that one. Literature study, case studies, surveys. That's always a nice, interesting mix. That one is usually done by people who really do not like face-to-face conversations. For my own dissertation, when I was a history student, I did literature study, case study interviews. Okay, that was what I was doing, and for one of my dissertations, one was entirely archival research, but the other one was on a particular war. I'm a naval historian. If you've gone to the rest of this YouTube channel, you will. That's not going to be hidden or a surprise to anyone. But I went through and did case studies on very specific events within that war, and I did them incredibly in depth as part of the amphibious side of that conflict, amphibious operations side of that conflict. Again, more details in the naval history side if you want to go there. So, what I'm saying is that, that is how you approach it. It's a very historical social sciences route. Basically, it's for people who don't usually use labs. When I get access to labs, they're usually called wind tunnels. Hello, my friends at Random Vale. And I use them for various things. But as a historian, that isn't a normal thing for me. But you are science, engineering, computing students. The normal for you includes some laboratory work, some simulations with maybe advanced computing power, all sorts of things which you may or may not have access to as readily now, or be able to do in as much detail, as a broader spectrum, or maybe at all in terms of labs. So you're having to use what is available to you as options, but you're going to have to use them all rather than partially. And that's why I've listed scenario 5 as an example of what is a normal time. If you're doing extensive laboratory work, you do a literature study. And, that would be a normal combination of the two. Okay? Right. So I'm just going to say, so that's sort of the normal time, but this is in time of no lab access. It's scenarios 1 to 4 are your main scenarios for how you're setting up your dissertations. Have chats with your supervisors about specifics. Have chats with SASC about specifics. If you want to email us, we do respond. I respond to emails on the days I'm paid, which is Monday and Tuesday. I'm sorry, but on other days of the week, I might well be being paid by other people. So I may log into my King's University email, check them, and respond. But if I am, that's entirely because maybe that's me doing it as a sort of, well, how to put it? That's me being nice, and it's me being slightly naughty, especially if I'm being paid by someone else. So hopefully, none of my other employers are watching. But there again, I might log into their emails on days when they're not paying me. So it might work it might work multiple ways. Literature review. So here's the trick, and if you've looked at the video with the literature review stuff in it, please, you'll know what I'm talking about. So this is an idea: is you pick 4 or 5 journal articles, 4 or 5 books, 4 or 5 magazines, and you structure it so it's journal, book, magazine, journal, book, magazine, journal, book, magazine, and you have them grouped into things of the sort of the areas, the subtopics, the objectives of your dissertation. Okay. And usually you have 1, maximum 2 paragraphs about each author, about each book and author, going through them, looking at them from the literature review perspective, using that sort of SEAL trick. How does this relate to your work? And give me some of an analysis context on that. A little bit. Well, when you're doing it for a literature review in terms of a literature study, for each author work, there needs to be 3 paragraphs. So a literature study is literally 3 times the size, in many respects, of a literature review. But a literature review is often 1 to 2 paragraphs on any particular book. a literature study is a minimum of 3 paragraphs. So it's more of a 50% growth than in reality. Because reality, if you want the first and you're doing just a literature review, you're talking about the 2 paragraphs for each book work. And they'll be drawn from these 3 paragraphs anyway. So pretty much what you're doing is you're taking these 3 topics and you're definitely giving them 3 paragraphs each, an individual paragraph each. So you've got the first paragraph is context. Where, when, who, why conducted the research. This has a matter and bearing, a factor, a real value in terms of analysing what the quality of the data provided is. Is it a government? What type of government is it? Is it a university? Is it a company which is, broadly speaking, sponsoring this because they want to sell something? Is it a think tank with a surprisingly opaque funding scenario? What is going on? Okay? This all has a bearing, and you have to know it, especially when you're dealing with commercial practices. Okay? Second paragraph, the results and the findings as assessed with the work, i.e., how do they fit within the work? What are they producing? What results are they claiming? How do those claims match up to the actual results they give? Because it wouldn't be the first time when you look at the results they give and the conclusion where they make these lovely grandiose statements that there is a disparity between the two. That you're thinking, well, these results look fairly good, but the conclusion is claiming some pretty astounding things, and the results don't back up that. And the third paragraph is analysis of the whole work from the perspective of the topic and focus of your dissertation. So not just the perspective of the individual objective which this might fit into, but the wider dissertation, the wider work as well. And everything has to be in academic English. Okay, I know I've said this before, but the whole dissertation, everything has to be in academic English. Yes, we are asking for your opinion, but you cannot use I, me, or my in it. So, you can use phrases like, the balance of evidence would suggest. This work, however, projects this. This work can be accused of, This work overall provides the dun dun dun. There are lots of ways of getting around it, but do not use I, me, or my. Using first person in academic English is a really big no-no and actually loses you marks. Okay? So please don't. Please think third person. Think like you're a computer writing a report. You have no personality. And I know that's cruel to computers because they do have personalities, including the one next to me, which likes to go wrong occasionally. But you have to think like that. And just like with sort of the previous structure, what you do is you do your 3 paragraphs on the journal article, then the 3 on the book, then the 3 on the magazine, and you go through them all. And you might well have another paragraph summarizing that section, as an extra tie-in at the end before you move on to your next objective, and it's set of paragraphs and your those things. You might well end up with a 10-paragraph format for your your 3 articles, maybe more. 3 is the minimum per book, article, or magazine, whatever. But it's not the maximum. The maximum is your word count, and that's what you have to balance. You always have to balance, because an extra paragraph in your literature study means a paragraph less elsewhere. Now, the thing is it going to get you marks? Yes. So it's worth it. Especially if, in the nicest way, at the time when you're not able to do lab work, so your methodology is not going to be that massive a chapter. You're not going to be having to explain all the lab work stuff you're going to be doing, because it's fairly straightforward. So using too much anything else you can use, you've got chapters which, in the nicest way, you can adapt. And if you were talking to a historian or social scientist, the methodology chapter becomes a section in your introduction, but that's not the case for you all. You have to have it separately. So, but a literature study will get you a lot more marks if done properly, especially in the format given earlier. In those scenarios, right? Case studies. Now, must be relevant, must be extensive available material, and most importantly, must be viable. Okay, so what do I mean by viable? Well, they must be relevant to your topic. They must have extensive available material. That's good. Must be importantly, must be viable. So that extensive material cannot be in a archive which you can't get into. It has to be something you can viably get to. It has to be something you can viably talk to people about in case of doing interviews. It has to be viable for you. So, in the nicest way, if you're in the UK at the moment, the odds are you can't travel around the world. So, it has to be somewhere. If you are going to be doing interviews, they're going to be done via Skype and via social distancing sort of things. If you're not in the UK, if you're elsewhere and you're looking to do it, again, what are your local rules and going on in terms of lockdown or whatever that's happening? What are other local rules of who you're interviewing? How are you going to approach it? How are you going to do it? These are things you need to think about before you pick a topic for your case study. Okay, at least 3, preferably 4. Read everything and make sure you put it in a bibliography. You do not want to get into trouble when, especially with the case studies, because you'll read so much, you'll become the experts on them. You'll become the topic specialists on those case studies. Those case studies, you will live, eat, breathe, sleep, everything. You will know them so well backwards and forwards that your family will pick up on them because they hear about you talking about them so often. Everyone in your life will hear about it. So that is the level we're talking about of new knowledge. But that means you need to be extra careful to make sure everything you read goes in your bibliography, because if something sneaks through and it's found that you've used a very similar section to someone else, but you haven't listened to bibliography, you haven't listed reference, and then your point to the lecturer is, oh yeah, I did read that, but I forgot to put it in. That sounds an awful lot like plagiarism, and it's really not good. It might be accidental, but it sounds so like plagiarism. So just save your butt, to use the French. Stick it in the bibliography. Because then all you can say is, well, I read it early on, but I didn't really, it must have been subconscious. If it's a small enough bit, that defense might well help you. Best combined with interviews for primary data, but also work well with surveys and literature studies. But if you're doing a survey, it's a survey and a case study link are quite an interesting scenario. In terms of when you're doing a specific survey and case study, your case study could be a solo case study and could be a Mahusa thing. In which case, your entire dissertation could be something like, I remember one student did it on London Underground and the construction of the Jubilee line and how that had affected residents above it. Now, that was combined a survey, interviews, and a literature study was combined into that to generate what was, in effect, one Mahusive case study, which was the dissertation. Arguably the entire topic was a single case study. But it was done in a massive amount of detail. The survey had over 5,500 responders, I think. The interview was, I think they conducted about 15 to 20 interviews. Unsurprisingly, this student did get a first. But that's the level you're talking about if you're doing a single sort of topic case, a single sort of case study approach. All those other research methodologies become combined within that case study. If you're doing a multiple case study approach, that's sort of slightly easier. So let's say you're looking at bridge design, or you're looking at computer game design, or you're looking at online retailers or investigations of drug therapies or exercise systems, you can do multiple case studies, and that can be good because that gives you comparisons, and you can do a lot of stuff with the comparisons. And there's a little scenario down there. It's a post COVID-19 scenario, really, because it has lab work, but that's a very viable one. Focused lab work, experimental simulation stuff. As you know, I'm Dr. Alex Clark. I'm the History of Engineering and Academic Skills one, but my sister is Dr. Karen Clark, and she's the head of the foundation yet at the moment. Who knows when you're watching this video? This is 2020 for all of engineering, and when she wants to do she does a lot of research based on landslides and all those sort of things, and she often will do experimental landslides where she'll basically set up mounds of earth and all other things and let it rip. That's how she does her focused lab work, experimental simulations. Although I have to admit, when she does do those, she does take over a huge chunk of the lab. You can always tell when my sister is in doing that sort of research. It takes up a huge chunk of the lab. She doesn't get to do them that often, thankfully. Otherwise, the poor lab technicians would just never be finished cleaning. So, how to approach a case study. Context can be any information 100 years either side. Yeah, so if you're picking something modern, that's fine. You've got 100 years before, roughly. But if you're picking something, let's say, built in 1800, you'll need to know about the stuff from the 1700s and 1900. All that site and what was going on. You might not need to actually use that information, but you'll need to access that information in terms of deciding whether you need to use it or not. And there you go. There's a nice bridge as an example. Someone last year may have done case studies on bridges, and they did 4 bridges they were looking at, and they were trying to design them. Well, basically, their idea was what kind of structure would be best used as a combined railway, bridge, and Thames Barrier 2. So the idea was that you would combine a railway crossing with Thames Barrier 2, because A, it would make construction of the Thames Barrier rather easier if you're building bringing a railway line out with you, and B, it'd be quite useful to get an extra link in, and then you could have a round London railway link sort of thing around the M25 sort of thing. That's an environmentally friendly sort of scenario. It was quite a cool project. I remember looking for it, but so they needed to look at relative types of bridges and relative types of things. Relative types of sea barriers. Sorry. Just give me a second. Sorry about that. Someone came to the door. Right. So, in terms of a case study, you have to slot in the primary search. You have to slot in all the data, everything into them as you go. So you would very much do a literature study at the beginning, but instead of having, let's say you did interviews, instead of having an interview section at the end on sort of experiments and mill, you would have your literature study, and then you'd have your case study 1, case study 2, case study 3, maybe case study 4, and you'd have the interviews, the information for the interviews put into those case studies along with everything else you gathered. Okay, so for each of those case studies, instead of having a specific interview section or even a specific survey section, you might well have the survey again will be integrated into the results be integrated into the case studies. Questionnaires and interviews. Gathering data from interacting with the public. Welcome to the danger zone. Ethics form zone, actually. It probably is more appropriate. But yeah, danger zone is definitely what I think about. Need to be done on a fair, consistent, and neutral manner. Okay. So. There is an old saying, lies, damned lies, and statistics. It's fairly accurate. You have to be very careful when you're doing a survey or an interview to not lead the responder. Now, before you start saying, well, how do you mean by leading? You think about how you ask questions and phrase questions for your friends and families when you want certain responses. If you phrase the question in a certain way, you can guarantee a response in a certain other way. That is great for your results, but if your lecturer is looking through your questionnaire and you give them your questions, which you have to, those have to be the questions that are used, and those are leading questions, it's skewing your own results. That's introducing bias into it, and that invalidates your work. Okay? This is why you have to be careful about when you're reading polling information, especially raw polling data and all these sort of things, because the information gathered can often depend as much upon the questions being asked as the reality of the circumstance. Interviews are core questions, have to be the same for everyone, but you're allowed to ask follow-up questions. But you do have to provide a transcript of those interviews. That's a full typed out narrative of what was said, by whom, and when. So timings and narratives in your appendices. They don't count towards your word count. You can then reference those as book, almost as if they're another book. Okay. As a rule, I would have to say, when I'm doing data analysis if I was a student, I would tend to lead towards interviews as being easier to manage, especially easier to schedule and work out when I'm going to get the information, how to slot it into my work. It's far more easier to program it. However, if you're going to be very busy for a certain period and then you're going to have to come back to your work, actually a questionnaire, a survey is a very good thing to set up if it fits in with your work, because you can leave it running on something like SurveyMonkey or some of the various other systems available that protect your privacy, your data, as well as the responders' data, unless they choose to enter anything in a box which says, if you wouldn't mind being contacted further about this, please leave your email address and name here. If they don't mind it, they can put, if they don't want to be contacted for follow-ups, for potentially for an interview, they will do that. If not, they don't. And you can leave that going. So if you're going to be busy for a couple of weeks because of family, work, other commitments, whatever, you can leave that running for a couple of weeks. Just come back to it after 2 weeks and go, how much result have you got? Especially if you've managed to make it use something like TweetDeck or social media, etc., to post it out to various other friends and various other peoples to make sure it's circulating for those 2 weeks. You can come back and could find 100, 200, 300, 400 responses, which is more than enough for data results. Okay? And the thing is, the more responders you get, the far easier it is to iron out anonymous responders or people who are just doing silly stuff. Okay? So the more you get, the better. But you have to be careful with both these scenarios that you are not leading the person in terms of your questions. You have to remember you are a student doing academic research. You are neither a journalist or investigative reporter, unless you're from that department of university, in which case that's a different topic as we've been over before, nor in terms of these things, you have to be very careful, especially if you're picking topics that you're passionate about. You have to be sure not to let your passion override their answers. Okay? You have to listen and let them speak and let them give their answers. You are interviewing, you are surveying those people for the information they can provide. You're not going to them to tell them how to think or to put our words into their mouths. Either of those approaches will not provide you with good data and will not provide you with good research. Okay, so that's SASC. That is some more research methodologies, and I'm sure I'll be returning to this before again, but I hope it's helpful. If you have any questions, you can find me at Kingston. SASC@kingston.ac.uk is usually the SASC email response. And I have my own one at Kingston University, which you can find on the email system. Just look up Dr. Alex Clark, and that usually pops up. Hope that helps. Take care and have a nice day.